Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Margaret Anderson's The Unknowable Gurdjieff. If you're with us and you're all caught up and you remember part 2, we ended with some of Jane Heap's abstractions, and they're rather intense. There's sort of a lot of information coming thick and fast, and I didn't finish all of the abstractions because after the ones that we read, I felt it was sort of very heavy going. But we will begin this evening's reading with the final 2 abstractions, which are on the mind and religion, which will be very interesting here now at the 4 ideals. And then chapter 5 has been made reference to before in the book, a chapter from her book, The Fiery Fountains. And ultimately she has just reproduced, it appears, she has reproduced that chapter here. And that's what we'll be reading this evening, chapter 5, A Life for a Life. And welcome. It's lovely to see you all. We'll likely have another few chapters on Wednesday evening. But if you're looking forward to more Margaret Anderson and then the De Hartmans after that, and perhaps Czeslaw Cekovich and many other things that we will be discussing here at the 4 Ideals, please consider, as always, if you haven't yet, like the video, subscribe, share the show. If you've got some like-minded friends who are interested in these sort of topics, do say hello if you're here watching and listening. But for now, the final couple of abstractions from the chapter before this, and this is the mind. Intelligence is an arrangement in the nervous centers, not arrived at by life, but given you at birth. Mind is posterior and superior to speech. Mind is the faculty of taking thought. Its real process is pondering. The subject matter should be large, true facts, the organization of the universe, etc. Its object is to group these ponderings into great wholes. But we cannot hold before our minds for 1 second the whole evidence about anything. Divine reason, everything seen at once, simultaneity, ideas with form. Mind is an active faculty. Take your impressions actively. Our mind is like an intricate mechanical arrangement, electricity, calls and responses, stimuli without a master. Our reason at present, simply a post-mortem on an irrational act. Real reason is developed by opposition to repetition and inertia. We waste our lives in associations, chiefly associations of words. Think at night of your words. Our words are aped or aped, whatever that means. The greatest poets have no experience of 9/10 of their words. Sometimes a simple peasant can say in 10 words something that a poet says in 100 words full of air. The poets have been our downfall. Artists, religionists, scientists have tried to think in forms, not formulas, but form like painting. An idea of 3 centers is a form. The idea of man as an idea is a form. Every situation in the world is like a problem in mathematics, has a positive, a negative, a neutral force, active, passive, and neutralizing. The neutralizing force is the form-giving force. And the final abstraction or set of abstractions is on religion. Excuse me. And so some of these may well be repurposed for other video ideas. Religion. All the great general religions created as history itself testifies by men of equal attainment in regard to the perfecting of their pure reason are always based on the same truths. The difference in those religions is only in the definite regulations they lay down for the observance of certain details and of what are called rituals. And this difference is the result of the deliberate adoption by the great founders of those which suited the degree of mental perfection of the people of the given period. Gurdjieff has also written, quote, "It is not a question of to whom a man prays, but it is a question of his faith. Owing to faith alone, there appears in a being the self-consciousness necessary for him, and also the valuation of personal being as a particle of everything existing in the universe. Faith is conscience, the foundation of which is laid in childhood. If a man changes his religion, he loses his conscience. And since conscience is sustained by his faith and his faith by his religion, therefore I respect his religion, and for me it would be a great sin if I should judge his religion or disillusion him in it, and thereby destroy his conscience, which can only be acquired in childhood." End quote. You must formulate your idea of good and evil. If you are holding up a cosmic scheme, you are evil. Objective good and evil. Understanding and effort equals right. Failure to achieve them is evil. By objective is meant permanent knowledge. By subjective is meant someone sits down in his armchair and makes up a system. Obedience to any sociological system, to any religion, or to anything else not arrived at objectively equals police regulations and traffic rules only. The Bible, the self-regeneration of man. We should spend our lives upgrading energies. This is the hidden meaning behind alchemy, to be born again. For rebirth, there is an exact science, the greatest in the world, and its technique is sacredly concealed. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. This prohibition was laid upon our race because information gives mind knowledge only, and mind knowledge tends to reduce the possibility of acquiring knowledge of one's being. Oh, good evening and howdy, Graham. How are you today? Testament means I will to you. The Old Testament, the New Testament equals knowledge willed to us. What is this knowledge? It is the fulfillment of potential being in every being, 3 brain beings. This is the purpose of the universe. The universe made flesh is Christ. John the Baptist is the I crying in the wilderness of the body. Adam, the unregenerate man, living in the first dough of the octave, living mechanically. And hi there, Flibbity Gibbets. Welcome, my friend. Development cannot begin until degeneration is arrested. This is a method to obliterate death. Our supreme effort is reproduction, a succession of bodies in ourselves, a psychological objective continuance of individuality. There are 2 kinds of immortality, the 2 births, 1 automatic and 2 conscious. The horizontal line is physical reproduction, heirs, and the vertical line is succession of oneself, the self-generation of man. Immortality is a potential fact. The potential is always more full of possibilities than the actual. We prepare our future by the way we use our energy. Every 24 hours, we're given a supply of energy. If we don't do something about it today, we can't in a year. Sins of the fathers. You did something yesterday, you pay for it 10 years hence. You are your own fathers in this. When we die, the vibrations that hold us together go into space. The vibrations of the physical organs run down the scale and go into the earth. But the I comes and comes until it develops. If you develop yourself, Gurdjieff says, you become an individual instead of one of the 1,000 leaves of a tree. You become a seed. The Gurdjieff theory. All things in life work on 2 laws, 3 and 7. All psychological things fall within the law of 3, the Trinity. All material things fall within the law of 7, the octave. Now we come to chapter 5, A Life for a Life. My aim in writing The Fiery Fountains, the part called A Life for a Life, was to show how one proceeds, by stages and degrees, to incorporate the knowledge we had been given in abstract form. Remembering certain words of Orage's, my conception of the book was that it should employ other means than dialectic. Somewhere he had written, quote, "Persuasion by dialectic is not only resistible, but what is done by its means can be undone by the same means. Persuasion, in short, is precarious. The sublime, on the other hand, does not persuade, it overpowers, seizes and holds captive. If it is irresistible and its effects are permanent, for what is admired has more lasting influence than what is only reasonable." So that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Orage comparing the sublime to dialectic to persuasion. And he says that the sublime is the most powerful. And back to Margaret Anderson. Thus the idea of finding an art form in which to tell my story would, I thought, guarantee its being admired and give it an influence beyond the merely rational. I began it with the simple history of our little review, days and inspirations, or aspirations, and with great effort managed to cast the whole experience into a form that I felt touched the art of evocation. I shall never forget how difficult it all was, but I had 3 months in which to work, and I worked with an intensity that seemed to spring from some inner resource that felt like inspiration. And as I said, the remainder of this chapter is the reproduction of this chapter from The Fiery Fountains. In the early days of the little review, people used to tell me that I had no critical sense, that I didn't know one thing from another. I always answered, I know the difference between life and death in everything. This is all I wanted to know. This gave me my superabundance of superiority. We, the superiors, made experience out of nothing. We made life out of ourselves. We never found so much excitement outside as inside. We didn't travel because strange lands weren't as fascinating to us as ourselves. We could buy photographs of the Taj Mahal, but we couldn't recapture the conversations we might fail to have if we spent our time hurrying off to see such monuments. We were the people who knew things without learning them. We were the producers rather than the product of experience. Our environment didn't condition us. We molded our environment. Enthusiasm was our validity. We knew nothing about throwing cold water except on the mediocre. Bourgeoisism went down before us as in a strong wind. We threw out the uninteresting and raised the interesting to incandescence. We didn't pass through thought to arrive at opinion. We leapt to resplendent conclusions. Words were too slow for us. We travelled by emotion. To me, our superiority was so undisputed that I was over 40 before I found anything that could challenge it. My most intense days in this personal calendar were lived in California. Jane Heap had joined the Little Review, and we were publishing it from a ranch house near Muir Woods across the bay from San Francisco. We brought out a number made up of 64 blank pages, announcing that we had found no art to publish, that we hoped to find some for the next number. We had never thought of art simply as painting, poetry, music and sculpture. We thought art was an expression through the arts of a need of something else. It was about this something else that we talked all those summer days. I remember the eucalyptus trees in the sun, the path beside them where we began to talk in the morning, walking up and down from the house to the barn. We walked up and down all day. When the sun set, I used to feel that the day had been perceived by us alone on earth, for surely no other people had spent all of it as we had in wandering about the world. From California we moved with the Little Review to New York. In summer we had a small grey house in Brookhaven, Long Island, where questions and answers went on forever. Under the blue locust trees, in shadows of sun and mist, we continued our shadowy speculations. During this time we had read a book by Claude Bragdon, which announced a coming book by a man named Ouspensky. It appeared under the title of Tertium Organum, and we considered that we had found a contemporary author with a great mind. But what interested us most about Ouspensky was the rumour that he was associated with a greater man, called Gurdjieff. Ouspensky was supposed to be writing a book about this man and his ideas, which would be called The Unknown Doctrine. Alfred Richard Orage, former editor of the New Age in London, came to New York as the precursor of this doctrine. He had just spent 2 years in France studying with the great man, so the story went, and if New York showed any interest in the doctrine, the legendary Gurdjieff himself might come. We went to the small theatre where Orage was to talk, with a feeling that our lives had waited always for what might be said there. Everyone we knew was in the audience, artists, intellectuals, socialites. We sat rather far back, I remember, because we wanted to watch the reactions of the audience. Mrs. Philip Liddig and Dr. Percy Stickney Grant sat just in front of us, Claude Bragdon across the aisle. Orage walked out upon the stage. He was tall and easy, but quick and sure, the most persuasive man I have ever known. He sat down and began to tell simply why he had come. Claude Bragdon interrupted by standing up to say that he had a letter from Ouspensky which he would like to read. It was a conventional letter. Everyone was bored. Bragdon was unaware of the boredom as he began commenting on the letter. Orage stopped him expertly and went on with his talk. But the ease and flow of the evening had been broken. "Talk louder," someone called out, "and be more interesting," Mrs. Liddig said loudly. This made me angry. "Don't do that," I whispered to her. "What's the matter?" she said, still loudly. "Don't you agree?" "Of course not," I said. "Just wait. He'll be so interesting. He'll be incomprehensible." But he wasn't. He had no intention of being merely interesting. We went with Orage afterwards to a child's restaurant and asked him all the questions we had been hoarding. By midnight we had learned that this doctrine would not fulfill our hopes. It would exceed them. Yeah, I think you're right there, Graham, isn't it? There's little, I've come to the conclusion, as you say, there's little we can do about the outer world, but the inner world, there is great potential. So I certainly agree with that, Graham. And well said. And then Gurdjieff himself came. It was announced that the Gurdjieff group would give its special dances in the neighborhood playhouse, and all New York gathered again. Orage read explanatory notes for each dance, and everyone in the audience, except the genius intellectual, realized that he was in the presence of a manifestation which had its roots in a source of which we know nothing. Our sense of this phenomenon was so sharp that we almost forgot about the man Gurdjieff, who was supposed to be somewhere behind the scenes directing the dances. From my seat down front I saw him for a moment in the wings, commanding his pupils, exhorting them to greater and ever greater precision. When we went back later to find Orage, I had just time to look carefully at a dark man with an oriental face, whose life seemed to reside in his eyes. He had a presence impossible to describe because I had never encountered another with which to compare it. In other words, as one would immediately recognize Einstein as a great man, we'd immediately recognize Gurdjieff as the kind of man we had never seen, a seer, a prophet, a messiah. We had been prepared from the first to regard him as a man different from other men, in the sense that he possessed what was called higher knowledge or permanent knowledge. He was known as a great teacher, and the knowledge he had to offer was that which in occult books and in the schools of the East is given through allegory, dialogue, parable, oracle, scripture, or direct esoteric teaching. From what Orage had told us, we knew nothing. From what Orage had told us, we knew that Gurdjieff presented his knowledge in a terminology which would not alienate the factual minds of Western thinkers. We had never been ranged among the factual, but neither had we ever been, nor could we ever be satisfied with the purely mystical or metaphysical. We looked upon this man standing in the wings of the neighborhood playhouse in New York City as a messenger between two worlds, a man who could clarify for us a world we had hoped to fathom, the world which the natural scientists had revealed, but not interpreted. I think I really thought of Gurdjieff at first as a sort of Hermes teaching his son Tat. But while it was impossible to understand the Hermetic dialogue merely by reading it or speculating about it, I felt that the essence of the emerald tablet itself might be made understandable to us through Gurdjieff's method of teaching. What I mean exactly is this: that what philosophers have taught as wisdom, what scholars have taught in texts and tracts, what mystics have taught through ecstatic revelation, Gurdjieff would teach as a science, an exact science of man and human behavior, a supreme science of God, world, man, based on sources outside the scope, reach, knowledge, or conception of modern scientists and psychologists. Later, at Carnegie Hall, another series of dances was given. Plans had been made for an accompaniment of 4 pianos, but as it turned out, there was only one, played by Monsieur de Hartmann, with the percussive splendour demanded by Gurdjieff. These dances were taken from or based upon sacred temple dances which Gurdjieff had seen in the monasteries of Tibet, and their mathematics were said to contain exact esoteric knowledge. New York was still interested, but the intellectuals had begun to complain that the performers' faces didn't register joy as they danced. I suppose these critics would have been pleased by an Isadora Duncan expressiveness over the movements of the planets in space. We spent all the time we could with Orage, listening to the ideas of Gurdjieff, and then one night Gurdjieff himself talked. He presented his ideas as not new, but as facts always known and always hidden, that is, never written down but passed from age to age through the teachings of the great initiates. Initiate had always been a word that left us cold, if not hotly antagonized, because of the nebulous thinking of the people who used it. But now we had no time to waste in revolt over words. The substance of Gurdjieff's doctrine was, for all of us, for the first time, an answer to questions. And this is rather lovely, isn't it? Because it's another account, of course, Margaret Anderson's account, her account of her first meetings with Gurdjieff, even not seeing him like the way it's occurred. You know, they see the dances and meet Orage first, and then only later come in contact with Gurdjieff. And of course, there are many, many, many of these accounts, and by learning them all, you can, as I often say, or used to say, you can create a very a picture, a very clear picture. All our lives, our questions had been, we thought, every man's questions. But every man seemed satisfied with answers which didn't satisfy us. If a great scientist said we can erect a coherent system dealing with all aspects of human knowledge and behavior by the refinement, extension, and continued application of the methods which have been so successful in the exact sciences, we said, no, you can't. There's something you won't be able to get at with those methods. If a great doctor said prayer is power, we said yes, it must be, but why? If a great philosopher based his doctrine on the incalculable forces of the spirit, we knew what he was talking about, but the phrase was vague. What are those forces? What more, if anything, can be learned about them? We found more meat in Hermes, for the Lord appeareth through the whole world. Thou mayest see the intelligence and take it in thy hands and contemplate the image of God. But if that which is in thee be not known or apparent to thee, how shall he in thee be seen, and appear unto thee by the eyes? But if thou wilt see him, consider and understand the sun, consider the course of the moon, consider the order of the stars. And I would imagine that's a quote from the Corpus Hermeticum. But since astronomers had no revelations to make except physical ones, and since no philosopher had ever spoken clearly about what it is to know thyself, we were left stranded. All we could do was to reiterate. In that region between physics and philosophy, is there no firm ground for the mind's construction of a faith? Gurdjieff's statement was that there does not exist a super knowledge, a super science, and what he had to say about it convinced us that we would never hear anything else to compare with it, never find anything else which could illuminate the great texts to which we had always wanted to give a reverent investigation. When he spoke of the way in which this knowledge could be acquired, a way which brought you gradually into a condition of knowledge, we were ready to believe that it might indeed be a way for us. But though we suspected the magnitude of the knowledge, we didn't realize how different its development and application would appear to us 15 years after our first encounter with it. And we certainly hadn't the faintest idea how difficult this particular way would sometimes be. After his first appearance in New York, Gurdjieff left for France, where in Fontainebleau-Avon he had established his Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. People from all parts of the world to whom his cosmology had become a way of life were living and working in the Institute. Orage and the group that had come to New York were returning with Gurdjieff. And so it was that in June 1924, Georgette, Jane, Monique and I, as well as several other people who felt as we did, left New York for Paris. We knew the import of our decision. We had prepared to cast aside our nets and follow. Fontainebleau-Avon. From the station we walked down the road to Avon to the end of the village where a forest begins. At the right was a garden door in a high wall. Jane pulled the bell and it tinkled long and softly. A boy with alert eyes opened the door, smiled with our curiosity, and asked us to come in. He said that Mr. Gurdjieff had driven to Paris, would be back for dinner, would we walk through the gardens where we would find our American friends. We entered a grass courtyard enclosed by the chateau and the wall. It had the aspect most becoming to courtyards, that of a garden half abandoned. In the centre was a fountain. Its gentle water dropped upon stone night and day. The boy led us through the chateau, which had once belonged to Madame de Maintenon, and was now called the Chateau du Prieuré. It was not wide but long, its salons opened both upon the entrance court and the formal gardens in front. Beyond were forests which led over pine-lined roads to the village of Moret, on a lovely river with the unlovely name of Lowing. We stood for a long time on the terrace among urns and balustrades and all the brighter flowers, drinking in once more the divine light of the air of France. The gardens were long. A fountain sprayed their stillness, and beyond them were stone benches under an arbour of yew trees. Perhaps not yew, but I always felt they were. The kitchen gardens were far in the distance, and we found our friends there among the vegetables. They took us through the chateau and indicated vacant rooms we were to choose from. The principal bedrooms were over the salons, and some American had named this wing the Ritz. It was used for transient guests. 2 other floors with small bedrooms were called the monastery. We chose ourselves here, mine over the dining room garden, Georgette's towards the forest. Jane chose a room at the back that looked into a farmyard, because she liked to be wakened by the crowing cocks. Here there was a small stable that had already become a legend, because Catherine Mansfield, during her last illness, had lain in the loft, breathing the healthy smell of cows and hay. At dinner there were... Oh, hello there, Melissa's Mind. Hello, nice to see you. At dinner there were perhaps 20 people at the table. Others, responsible for the feast, ate nearer the kitchens. We were surprised to see Ouspensky among the guests, having heard that he had left the Institute for good. On this first night we were curious about Ouspensky. He sat at Gurdjieff's left and acted like a small boy, laughing more than he meant to, saying what he meant not to, flushing with the Armagnac forced upon him. This situation wasn't to Ouspensky's detriment. It is the lot of everyone who passes through the Gurdjieff life class. As we learned later, the ritual of toasts in Armagnac had to do with the psychology of human types. And since the important matters were never explained to you in this school until you yourself came upon them through long experience and repetition ad nauseum, it took me many years to understand the hierarchy of the toasts or to apply it to myself and others with even the beginning of accuracy. Though Ouspensky must have taken part in this ceremony 100 times, I always felt that he had never discovered its significance, that he knew ideas but didn't know people. Gurdjieff's doctrine of the unknown began with the man, the unknown. Yes, I think you could be right, Graham, couldn't you? As Fritz Peters writes, he was often on gate duty, wasn't he? Gurdjieff's doctrine of the unknown began with man, the unknown. The doctrine was embodied in an enormous manuscript on which Gurdjieff was working day and night. During our first months at the Priory, Gurdjieff was personally inaccessible, at least to our group. We saw him at mealtime, in the study house after dinner during the dances, in the salon for readings of the manuscript, at cafe tables in Fontainebleau for the translation of new chapters, sometimes in his car for trips which most people hoped to avoid as they were nerve-wracking. But he wasn't available for personal communication or instruction. He had finished one phase of teaching and had not yet begun upon the next. Even now I cannot attempt to describe Gurdjieff. I would feel as if I had been asked to write a description of nature in all her moods, and I cannot talk of the material of his teaching, of its method, or its meaning. I can tell what it did to me, that is all. It is adjusted differently to every individual, and everyone would tell of it differently. It is completely different from what I imagined it would be, from what I understood it to be, stage by stage. It is a story of a new education, of taking whatever degree your heredity and upbringing, your wish and your will make possible. It has no relation to psychoanalysis or any of the other modern introspections. Introspections into what? Into what? Non-existence? It is a cleansing and a filling. Its science consists in the precision with which you are charted, by which you are aided, slowly enough not to break you, fast enough to keep you in that state of wonder, surprise, shock, torment, remorse, reward, which alone taps your potential forces. The first statement I heard Gurdjieff make about his teaching was, "I cannot develop you, I can create conditions in which you can develop yourself." The Institute had been in operation for 2 or 3 years before we arrived, and I remember the people who were working there as some of the most interesting people I have ever known. One especially, from Constantinople, became a great friend of ours. In her outer manifestations, she personified what they had all tried to attain, a holding in rather than a going out. She was a genial kind of person, but she always made you conscious of a silence in her. She didn't tell you what she thought about anything. At first this puzzled and exasperated me. I still measured people by expressiveness and thought by expression. I decided that she didn't think, or that she was inarticulate. Later I noticed that she talked rather vaguely of anything at all until she was questioned. Then she answered with economy, holding herself to the frame of your question, offering no more than it called for. After a few weeks of this technique, I came to feel a power in it. This woman didn't thrust herself at you. It was as if she realized that one has very little self to thrust. She gave you no stories of her inner life. She seemed to know that no one has any inner life worth mentioning. Of course, there were other people in the group who had mastered few or none of the realities that were being taught. They were as vain as people everywhere in life who express their personalities at all times, and that's rather interesting, isn't it? Even though they're there at the Priory, they're working with Mr. Gurdjieff, they were as vain as people everywhere in life who express their personalities at all times. Orage was at the Priory when we arrived. He and his wife, with several other pupils from New York who had been there before, formed our immediate group. But there were also new people from France, England, Germany, and points east. According to type, each got something, nothing, or everything out of being there. Everyone who came knew the fantastic stories of the Institute's purpose, which had been imagined and reported, from vague spiritual interpretations to the definitely gross ideas of certain Frenchmen or the naive generalizations of certain Americans. One of our New York friends, a little review contributor, stayed at the Priory only one day. She asked intellectual questions and received allegorical answers. She began to feel spiteful. "If there's anything in all this," she said, "someone can put it into a phrase for me. Otherwise I won't know whether I'm for it or not." None of the Gurdjieff people tried to put anything into a phrase, though Jane did her best by saying, "It's a method to keep your past from becoming your future." It's quite a nice sentence, isn't it? Or a phrase, sorry. Is a method to keep your past from becoming your future. Our New York friend ignored this. "I don't know why they won't talk," she said. "I asked the least anyone can ask." No one disputed this, and she left the next day. 14 years passed before I saw her again, when she came into Michaud's to dine one night and sat at our table for coffee. I didn't know what she thought about anything at this time, but when she thought of us, she evidently thought of religion, because she said, "Still learning to be good?" I didn't know what to answer. I could think of no phrase that would catch her attention. Instead of speaking, I sat and thought about her and 14 years, and observed the sadness of life. It wasn't that she looked older, her face was unlined and her vitality unworn, but 14 years of the same reflexes, mannerisms, reactions, gestures, postures, expressions had traced their paths on her psyche as associations plough through the grey of the brain. I knew in advance exactly what she would say, having heard it in the years before, so I didn't listen. Instead, I watched her mannerisms announce in advance what she would say. This pantomime, unconscious and sculptural, composed the tragedy. When a line formed at the corner of her mouth and drew it down in a bitterness deeper than ever before, I knew what she was going to say. I knew that she was going to say, "Well, that's the way it is." It was like watching an actor walk upon a stage in the role of vanity, giving a photographic performance of the visible signs of self-love upon the organism. But what impressed me most was the length of time that passed between the beginning and the end of the mouthed gesture and the beginning of the spoken phrase. It hadn't been so long years ago. Now it seemed a full minute. I thought of someone's definition of Gurdjieff's teaching as a method of acceleration. I thought of all kinds of acceleration I had watched since my first contacts with people who had accelerated. Of all the people who came to the Priory while I was there, no one was ever asked to stay if he wanted to leave, and no one was asked to leave if he really wished to stay. Some were not received at all. One well-known woman came out from Paris expecting to be received as a celebrity. Gurdjieff didn't know who she was, but he saw her from a window when she arrived. She was told he wasn't there. The story of his brief explanation, of course, went the rounds, at least to the three of us who always had our ears at the psychological keyhole. Her vanity was too fixed. It would take years to break it up. She was not young. The chances were against success. His effort would be disproportionate, since hers would probably be non-existent. Another quick flight was made by an American woman who stayed only 3 days. She reacted to new situations as if they were old ones. This made her angry, and she left in disdain. One of the most touching people who fled was the man who said he hadn't the courage to start on what might be only another wild goose chase after knowledge. He left sadly. There was an English woman who identified everything she heard with her own idea of Buddha, and then left to continue a life devoted to her own nebulous conception of know thyself. And there was another woman who announced that you could find 100 such teachers in the world, that this doctrine was no more interesting than any other. If we hadn't already heard enough to know its uniqueness, at least for our time and place in the world, we might have been influenced by all the cross-currents, the people who called it and us too material, those who said we were hypnotized, those who predicted our decline into mysticism or a sort of super-metaphysics. but it would have taken a lot of effort to be influenced by people who discovered only mysticism in the most lucid formulations and who sensed neither mystery nor knowledge in the most paradoxical. So we simply got to work on the doctrine and on ourselves, and there was nothing simple about either activity. And that's another nice phrase, isn't it? Working on the doctrine and on ourselves. Of course, the doctrine would be the books, Search the Miraculous, Beelzebub, all of the other canonical texts, and obviously on ourselves is what we learn from the doctrine. And so, yes, again, I think any book on Gurdjieff is wonderful, but this is a very different taste to what we would read over at the book club before. I'm sorry, just very quickly, if you do miss any of those readings, you can sign up to the book club app and request whichever one you're missing dearly, and I'll upload that for you. Outwardly, at the Priory, we felt that our days were numbered. Inwardly, we felt that we had been given a key to a new model of the universe. Outwardly, we didn't go through any of the training that the older pupils had demonstrated in New York. That was over for the moment. Gurdjieff was finishing the last chapters of his book, and everyone was absorbed in translation from Russian into English, French, German. Besides this, we worked in the kitchen gardens. We straightened garden paths. Too slow, Gurdjieff said, walking by. Must find way to do it in half time. We cut grass and helped to cut down trees. I had a small, silent, portable piano, which I sometimes took out under the yew trees to practice on. Waste of time, Gurdjieff said, walking by with the musician, Thomas de Hartmann. Must find shortcut. I sought out the musician later, hoping for interpretation. He began, Orensky had only 4 fingers on one hand, but he could play anything and play it as he wanted to. Question of engineering. Then he gave me so much new information about techniques and the mechanics of bodies in relation to instruments that I was tempted to return to art. But I had not gone to Gurdjieff to learn more about art. I wanted to learn more about the universe. If anyone had asked me exactly what I wanted to find out, and if I could have answered as simply as a child, I would have said, I want to know what is God. When I realize now how I might have related this wish to an essential conduct and how I couldn't, I'm appalled. If I had known how to ask a question, I could have been simple. I, who have always been so sure of simplicity, I could have asked, what does it mean, in my Father's house there are many mansions? What does it really mean? Or, will you tell me something about the Last Supper? Why does religion seem to offer no real interpretation of this sacrament? I wouldn't have received answers that could be regarded as answers, since what and why were always discouraged at the Priory, and only how was sometimes rewarded. But I might have started 10 years earlier on that break-up of my own image which precedes any study of man created in the image of God. As it was, God was not mentioned in this place after the day when someone at the table succeeded in a direct question and Gurdjieff answered, You go too high. I never found a way to overlap these barriers made for leaping. I had so much awe of all that I heard, I was so convinced that I would learn what it meant through some extension of the mind, that I could think only of studying it, discussing it with everyone that is continuing to live, as I had always lived, by imagining what I could of the ideas involved, hoping that everyone else's imagination could work too, and believing that if we thought and discussed long enough, we would come upon revelations. I don't regret the endless discussions. These first years of the Gurdjieff abstractions were a golden age to me. But if you linger on it, you never arrive at essentials. When you get beyond it, you realize why all the stories told about Gurdjieff's presentation of the Hermetic wisdom are surface stories. I have yet to see in print, even in the 2 respectable articles written by men who have worked with him, a single indication of the concrete substance of his mentation. Someone writing anonymously said, For me, the most sensational aspect of Gurdjieff's work was a sort of sublime common sense. I mean that my experience resembled many times those of the initiate in antiquity who was asked by his friends how he felt when he was told the secrets of an occult brotherhood. Like a fool, he said, for not having seen for myself the truth they taught. After my golden age, I never felt this facility of seeing for oneself. You don't mean that there's anything really secret about this doctrine, do you? People have asked me for years. How answer such a question? In two ways, perhaps. Either there are no secrets or nothing but secrets. Atoms aren't as secret as they were. Someone has charted them and broken them up. But in 1925, I hadn't been bombarded and split up as the atom had. The Priory of my day was not the institute where pupils were wakened at all hours, pushed beyond their second wind into real fatigue. Their life habits turned into two difficult new patterns. All this came to me later in a quite another form. The Priory, I remember, is a place where reverent study filled the days and nights. After dinner we went to the study house, originally an aeroplane hangar from war days, later converted by Gurdjieff into a place for work. The floors were covered with oriental rugs, and we sat on cushions arranged in two tiers around the walls. There was a large, slow stage on which pupils worked out the intricate sacred dances. Usually Gurdjieff began the evening at the piano, composing the music for a new dance movement which Thomas de Hartmann scored simultaneously. Then the pupils began to work it out under Gurdjieff's instructions, always given in a mental shorthand that sounded far too rapid to be understood. But the woman from Constantinople and several others translated the commands into movement almost as swiftly as Thomas de Hartmann had made the piano orchestration. Sometimes afterward, if there were guests who wanted to understand the aim of the Institute, Gurdjieff would talk. This talk was always geared to three audiences: the guests, the pupils, and Gurdjieff himself. That is, first what the guests would make of it, what the pupils would learn of the guests and of themselves as they listened to Gurdjieff, and what Gurdjieff himself would learn of the guests and the pupils. Afterwards we would go to our rooms and philosophize over what we had heard. The subject matter that so engrossed us was not material we had heard before, though we might have discovered it in Hermes, Buddha, the Bible, and had we known how to. Gurdjieff's terminology was completely new, but what held our attention and stretched our minds was the body of knowledge to which the terminology was applied. Study of man's psyche from the standpoint of an exact science, illuminating the mystery of the processes by which a man can be said to be born again. Unless a man be born again, this was the keynote of Gurdjieff's science, his work, his effort, his example. For this reason he had no patience with the man who merely philosophizes. His interest was in the man who can do. Later we were to understand a great deal about this distinction. I see now that we lived those first great years of Gurdjieff's teaching in a cloud of conviction that we were not treating it as a philosophy. Because the ideas involved in this science were new to us, we thought our reactions to them were new. Because our minds were exploring this knowledge, we assumed that our hearts were understanding it. We thought we had already outgrown those self-regarding inflations for which Gurdjieff had one-word description: psychopathic. We thought we were already well advanced on the road to self-knowledge. How far we still had to go, even to make a start, was fortunately hidden from us all. Oh, hello there, Mike Hayden. I'm glad you found it too, my friend. Hit subscribe and more content to come for sure. Life seems to be an experience in ascending and descending. You think you're beginning to live for a single aim, for self-development or the discovery of cosmic truths, when all you're really doing is to move from place to place as if devoted primarily to real estate. Looking back, I see myself en voyage, clutching my suitcase of Gurdjieff's ideas, convinced that my only property lay inside it, but spending 4/5 of my time searching a home where we could really work. In those brief intervals of home peace, the real emphasis was on home rather than on cosmos. Of course, we gave our minds to the latter and to the terror of the situation presented by our inertias. But since inertia is man's tradition, could we, by our own efforts, push back civilization single-handed, as Orage so often said? We read and reread the Gurdjieff manuscript, but I began to feel that there must be something to do that we weren't doing. I still reacted to our meetings and discussions with exultation, but I knew this state to be simply my capacity for being moved. Pushed to its extreme, it becomes the mystic's ecstasy. Anything can be believed in such a state. I was not made to be a mystic. I've always been skeptical of faith without science. The real object of this quest was surely that injunction about being born again. We were approaching such a condition. I couldn't see that we were. I didn't minimize the actual transvaluation of all values, which seemed to me the most important byproduct of our investigation, so important that I wanted to spend my time proselytizing for them. I thought people would take to great ideas as motors take to petrol, but they didn't. They simply continued to say, "I'm all against this looking into oneself. It's dangerous." "Of course it may be dangerous," I said, "unless you keep on looking." I could never understand why they wouldn't face this danger as well as any other. Was it that they saw in themselves frightened them? Was it that what they saw in themselves frightened them more than other dangerous sights? In trying to apply the Gurdjieff values to human behavior, our most passionate arguments always took place over art and religion, since you can't convince an artist that art isn't mankind's noblest expression, and you can't convince a religionist that there exists a more elevated conception of good and evil than the one he holds. I have lost years of youth trying to persuade religionists that Bohm was right when he said, "Anyone who hasn't learned that there is no more good in one thing than in another is still a child." I remember one all-night struggle with a religious group which Jane summed up like this: "You people are talking of an emotional experience, religion. You say we make a god of the mind because we are talking of something that is experienced on 3 planes. Your emotional experience can be compared to a dog's joy in greeting his master, because a dog has only 2 planes of experience. I'm not minimizing the dog's experience, but your statements reduce all humanity to animals." Rather harsh summation by Jane Heap there. I continue to believe that all this talk would make people stop, look and listen. "Why do you think so?" Jane said. "Look at your results." She was right. My results couldn't have been more disastrous if I had been advocating murder instead of self-development. One day Orage asked me, "Why are you always arguing about right and wrong?" "Because I'm going to convince people," I said. "But you know you can't." "No, I don't. I believe that if I can present these ideas intelligently enough." "Good heavens," he said, "you don't really believe that people are ever convinced of anything by listening to ideas?" "Of course I do," I said. "What other way is there?" "There are only 3 ways of influencing people," he said: magnetization, competition, and example. It's interesting as well, isn't it? Orage's view there. I was always running up against the injunction that by taking thought, a man cannot add a cubit to his stature. The Gurdjieff mentation was supposed to be the wedge that entered just here. The brain is not an organ with which to arrive at truth. The brain is just a muscle. Mind, as we know it, merely uses words, formulates reactions, runs out a chain of associations, repeats received ideas, stirs up a heap of impressions received passively. This statement led to a summation. The first step in becoming an adult is to realize that things are done to us, not by us. There, within a sentence, was a concept with dimensions. There, within the framework of the concept, was the quintessence of a theory and a technique which Gurdjieff presented not as a unique theory, but as a unique activity. There, in a single formulation, was expressed our adherence to this unknown doctrine in which, for the first time, we were hearing things that were not merely repetitions of things we had already heard. I was quite willing, I thought, to give up my loyalty to the mind, but I wanted to be convinced, or to convince myself, that I was approaching a process higher than taking thought. I believed that if the potentiality of such a faculty existed, we would find it in this doctrine. But I didn't for a moment believe we had yet done so. When would we? Why hadn't we already? Because of some obstacle unknown to us within ourselves? I hadn't yet the vision to know whether this was so or not, and, if it was, of what the obstacle consisted. Of course, I knew that this knowledge runs through all great legends, allegories, parables, and that it can be found in the whole scale from fairy tales to scripture. That it is suggested in all great systems of thought, in all great schools, Hermes, the Gnostics, the Essene monks, Pythagoras. Of course, I kept saying to myself, we were digging out the findings and building up the parallels. We were learning why there is no real religion in the world, and why the words of Jesus Christ have not been understood. Why God is not known or worshipped, merely used. Why most religious interpretation has been distortion. Why true religion means something else. Why the something else is never written down, never referred to, except under the protection of formal thought. Why it is never offered for nothing. Why a life must be given to find this life. We thought we were ready to give our lives for it, but how we were to discover unaided the unwritten demand behind the immense abstractions. Of course, we were being aided by Gurdjieff, but the aid was offered in those terms which I had not yet come to understand. I cannot develop you. I can create conditions in which you can develop yourselves. What was it that we were to do beyond trying? Take impressions actively, so that things could be done by us, not to us? All the keys to this enigma were perhaps offered in the Gurdjieff manuscript, but, as its author said, they were placed far from the locks. I felt that all my speculation continued to be purely imaginative, and I knew that Orage had a definition of imagination which left you without any pride in this faculty. Imagination, as we use it, he said, is simply an excess of desire over ability. In our desperate and impersonal self-examination, we would meet for discussion and try to illuminate ourselves about ourselves. To all of us, Jane's formulations for self-questioning were the most vital. She would present questions like the following, and we would try to dig out the answers. 1. How much of your life is an illusion? The world as it appears to you through the distortions of lack of self-knowledge. 2. How many failures or negative results from well-intentioned, well-conceived, hopeful plans do you think were caused by your illusion being too patent to others with other illusions? Have you ever had a glimpse of the extent to which you rest under self-hypnosis, under which you rest under self-hypnosis? Have you ever been aware of the power of self-love as an hypnotic force? 3. Have you ever had a moment of realization of the spectacle of human beings going through life in a state of deep hypnosis? 4. Could you ever detach yourself enough from your illusory world to conceive a world of reality in which each person perceived reality as one and the same thing, not interpreted by the whims, vanities, likes and dislikes of a reacting animal, but perceived by a permanent understanding threefold I, able to use the chemistry and vibrations of his type unconsciously instead of always being acted upon from the outside, as we are? We asked Orage, is contemplation the process higher than taking thought? No, he said. Contemplation is the last note in the thinking octave, but only the first note in the octave of a higher process. That's something to consider, isn't it? I'll read that again. Is contemplation the process higher than taking thought? No. Contemplation is the last note in the thinking octave, but only the first note in the octave of a higher process. What interests me now as I review our evolution in the Gurdjieff teaching is that for so long I never doubted that all our talk and thinking would provide the desired self-development. Of course, talk gives you almost as much new gland life as being in love does. But why, since I knew that being in love doesn't necessarily lead to anything beyond being in love, did I assume that talk inevitably leads to something beyond talk, for instance, to being? It took me so long to find the right answer to this question that I have never since been able to look back upon my thinking past with pleasure. During most of these middle years of our great experience, Gurdjieff was not easily accessible. It may be that he would have been if he had known how to need what he had to offer. I'll try again. During most of these middle years of our great experience, Gurdjieff was not easily accessible. It may be that he would have been if we had known how to need what he had to offer. In the autumn of one of these years, we had to face a fact that none of us knew how to face. Orage died in England. The year 1934 had come, and we were still in Vernay when we heard that Gurdjieff was in Paris. Then came the news that he was accepting a small group for special teaching. From Paris, Salita sent me reports of this teaching, daily pages of her struggles through the almost unbearable tensions of trying to die to an old life. The effort to pass on this experience to me was a labour of love, and I doubt that I, under the same circumstances, could have accomplished it for anyone, however much I might have wanted to. As I reread these notes today, I come upon a formulation in 2 words, a noun followed by a verb of such extensions that you feel you can never again regard any fact without examining it under the influence of this verb. Of course, 2 words on a piece of paper are open to any interpretation that 2,000 million people can give them. Everything, in the end, is interpretation. But what interpretation? You can take 3 phrases like a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, a life for a life, and interpret them in any way you like. But to knock out someone's tooth or pluck out someone's eye for your own lost tooth or eye, to kill someone because he has killed someone else, these retaliations can't be the meaning. No one ever gave me a hint in my young days that these 3 phrases present a picture on 3 planes of man's 3 interacting systems. We do have second teeth that replace baby teeth. We do develop an eye to see those things which are unseen. We do have to give up one kind of life to find another kind. But no parents or teachers or religionists seem to know the simple meanings. They simply say, the words of Jesus are clear and cannot be misunderstood by anyone who wants to understand them. Wants to, and then what? Up to this point in my pilgrim's progress, I had tried to build my thinking on the following model. Think large, true facts seen as forms such as the organization of the universe. Forms of thought are energies. Think. From birth to death we are immersed in actions. We fitfully guide ourselves away from or towards things. We cannot hold before our minds for 1 second the whole evidence about anything. The mind's object is to grasp the facts as wholes. Elevate yourselves. Seek out emotions and thoughts that are appropriate to a mind that is self-feeding. Everything eats everything else. The universe feeds itself. The statement that most fired my imagination, I remember, was this one. After a certain rate of vibration, everything in the universe becomes psychological. Air and light equals psychological food, the transmutation of substances. But what was I to do with this thought? I couldn't think beyond the fact that the visible physical world is the physical body of the universe. Then I must bring in as above, so below. All right, I too have a physical body. I can see it. All right then, the next step must obviously be the human body is given to you to understand the universe. All right, next. We are made up of, are replicas of, the universe. Well, if the human body is made like an electric station, generating and wasting energy, it is here that the transmutation of substances comes in. Transmutation would lead to a very great thought: the self-regeneration of man, an effort at reproduction, a succession of bodies in ourselves, each of a higher vibration. In other words, immortality. Well, all right, I certainly know that I have something more than a physical body. I have an emotional body and a mental body. But how, in thought, am I going to relate these bodies, which I can't see, to higher substances of the universe, which I can't see? No, thought comes to an end. Try images then. All right, man made in the image of God. But I couldn't complete the image. Beyond thought and image, I was waiting for that knowledge to come of as above, so below, which I felt would one day burst upon me in a blinding light. In a way, it seemed so simple an image that no one could fail to construct it step by step. In another way, it seemed that no man could ever do it, that we would continue to exist only in relation to a mystery. November, December, January, February, March were still to come, and Georgette and I were to spend them in Vernay, out of contact with the man in Paris who was helping the group of people step by step into the knowledge of that process higher than taking thought. I was so tormented by our absence from this source that I began to dream of our predicament. I hadn't dreamed for years, but now I had a dream like an old mystery play. In it were slaves, but at the same time we were actors in a drama in which the roles had been distributed for conscious playing. We walked as a peasant through life, yet we were walking on a stage. There were 2 columns at its ends, with wide steps between them leading away from the audience. We came on at the left in a long procession, walking slowly. At the centre of the stage we turned our backs to the audience and walked down the steps. When it came my turn, I was too tired to go beyond the first step. I sat down on it to rest. The slaves behind me were held up. They tried to push me on, crying that I would be beaten if I stayed there. I said, "We are such tortured people, we can bear no more." Then I noticed that I was sitting with my hands on my knees, that I had raised my head and I was looking straight out before me. In a flash there passed through me a vision, like those told by mystics, of ineffable impression, in which the meaning of all life appeared to my consciousness. I thought, I may never again see this as a whole. Such total impression cannot happen often. It is like a picture of hope. I began to call out to the other slaves, "There is hope, there is hope. We can work for being." They crowded around in fear and tried to quiet me. "You must not speak of it aloud, they will kill us." I went on crying loudly until an old slave pushed through the crowd and took my hand and led me to the bottom of the steps. He asked the others to gather round and we all sat down in a circle about him. We were now sitting at the bottom of the steps, invisible to the audience. Then in a quiet voice, so that no one else would hear him, the old man began to address us. "Is there anyone here," he said, "who can say he knows what is meant by love of God?" This dream only increased my trouble. It was precise in its symbolism. It pictured my stranded state. I began to compose self-indictments. Why don't I know what to do? The answer must be that I don't believe in these ideas enough, or that I am no longer capable of acting on my beliefs. Why don't I believe enough? I am convinced that nothing else makes sense. If I continue to ask, does anything make sense? I know that asking this question for years is no way of finding an answer to it. Then what in the name of sense holds me back? Why don't I begin to work? Why does the thought of it paralyze me? Why do I hold back longer than before a plunge into a cold lake? I could have answered that I really didn't know what to do and could by no means find out. I knew, of course, that there was always a work to do, that difficult work of trying to know yourself by observing yourself. So, in Vernay, I decided to perform this exercise more conscientiously. I remembered Orage saying, "Make a list of all the facts you know about yourself. Perhaps then you can begin on your unknowables. But I had made many analyses of my nature, and I asked myself what good they did. Gurdjieff had said that one's nature never changes. That is not the change you can effect. I knew that really to observe yourself scientifically, you are supposed to do another kind of examination. It consisted of not thinking, not feeling, but trying to see what happens. Not constating what you thought or felt or imagined, all this being invisible to an onlooker, but trying to see yourself move and speak as you can see actors on a film screen moving and speaking. I had conscientiously tried to do this last year when I was so unhappy that I no longer recognized myself. I was at the lighthouse, and every night I used to light candles as if, while they burned, they would lighten my world. I felt that I could almost see myself walking upstairs. The house was cool and dark with the sadness of late summer. I came to the 3 steps leading down to my room. On the last one I stopped because I was lost in the room as in a forest of night. All I wanted was to sit down against a tree. Once, long ago, I fainted. I was walking down a hotel corridor when high banks of green water rose on either side of me. For a long time I walked between them, and as I touched the door handle of my room, the waters closed over my head. The last thing I remembered was lying down on an ocean bed. On this night at the lighthouse I kept on walking towards oblivion, but came instead to a table with a candlestick on it. I lighted all the candles in the room. The windows were closed, and their glass reflected candles of light on the trees outside. There were 10 candlesticks, 2 of fluted glass standing on an old blue chest, 2 crystal ones on a walnut table. The rest were pewter and retained rather than gave off light. I sat down and looked about the room. Then I began to realize that I saw everything in it but myself. I saw the whitewashed walls and the red floor. I saw the white rug and the pink morning glory curtains. I saw for the 1,000th time these objects and others, books and pictures and my beach side pyjamas lying on the bed. But I did not see, even for the first time, the person sitting in the chair. I made an effort to see this unseen person. Anyone else could see her as if she were moving on a film. I could only remember how she felt, remember certain words she said and certain things she did, but I couldn't hear her voice saying those words or see her movements as she drifted through actions which she did not know in advance she would perform. I knew, though I did not see it, that she had come and gone through this house through a period of years, sometimes moving through a spell, sometimes through conviction and obsession, sometimes through bewilderment or outrage or despair. I was convinced that if I could actually see what she did and hear what she said, I would know more about the kind of person she was and more about the trouble she was in. I had come to believe that this kind of sight might help. Why did I believe it? Perhaps because people have tried everything else and nothing seems to have helped. No one has known human beings who give the impression of acting from knowledge of themselves or of other people. I didn't want my life to go the way of all life, to be born only to wander through experiences, to wonder at the sameness of those experiences, to want other experiences, to tire of wondering and waiting, to live at the end in remembrance of experiences and to die without wonder, memory, or experience. I seemed to be doing just this, and yet I knew that in fact my life was changing. It was in this year at the lighthouse that the change began. It was in this year that the lighthouse itself changed for me. It became more than a place of peace. It will always remain for me a place where I left one of my selves which was to have no further life. I have an exact image of this separation. It left me with the feeling of being, from this time on, beside myself. The image came to me one night when I was very tired. Sleep overcame me at dinner. I heard Jane's voice saying, why don't you put your body down on the bed? I remember getting up, pulling my top coat tighter, walking a few steps to a divan and falling upon it face downwards. Hours later I wakened and went upstairs to my room. As I walked up the stairs I saw a figure in a pink topcoat on a divan. I got into my bed, I lay down. I didn't seem to be there, at least something of me wasn't there, because I kept seeing myself lying face downwards downstairs. The next morning the image persisted. It has persisted ever since. A top coat holding a body which lay down on a bed. For me, it never got up. And it continues. We've got a new subheading, Life Class. And I think we're going to continue on Wednesday. So, yes, my friends, sadly that's it for this evening. And on Wednesday we'll conclude A Life for a Life. And chapter 6 is An Effort That Failed, which is only a short chapter. And then Cette autre chose, which... Again, I don't know what that means. I'm sure I could look it up. And so that's what we'll read. And then likely in the next reading, we'll finish the book. So lots still to come. But yeah, I think we'll leave it there for this evening. And I must say, I am thoroughly enjoying Margaret Anderson's take on things. She has a very distinct way of writing, very emotional, very artistic, right? Very intuitive. And so I'm enjoying it very much. And also to share some of the other things we'll be working through and talking about here at the channel. I do have many thoughts to share on the 4 ideals, of course, on, the sort of the significance and synchrony of the religious ideas, as Gurdjieff says in Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, right? That all the religions are, the avatars were sent from the Endless Creator to help to awaken humanity. And like I say, I won't digress into that now, but I hope you enjoyed that, and thanks all so much for joining. As I say, I'm busy tomorrow, but Wednesday we'll be back to finish A Life for a Life and to read chapter 6 and 7. So thank you, my friends, for being here. We'll be back on Wednesday. I'll try and have something to upload tomorrow. And yeah, the 4 ideals continues. Be sure to share the channel. Tell a friend if you have anyone interested in religion, more from a curiosity standpoint. Flippity Gibbets, you're very welcome, my friend. It's lovely to see you. And as I said, we'll be back on Wednesday. So I hope to see you then. Same sort of time probably. But for now, I'll say thanks again for joining. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Look after yourselves. Take care. And I hope to see you again on Wednesday. Bye now.